You're by the book. I like it.
Well, I got you on the phone. I'm so glad to hear from you, Jennifer. I've been racking my brain on how to make the most sense out of what we've seen come from these documents that came out yesterday. I'd love to get your insight. I know maybe one of the bigger things is the location that some of this stuff was found. What was sticking out to you?
Well, I think the biggest thing, having now had some time to really closely review the documents, the most important ones are the ones that indicate where the items were found, as well as the presumptive tests that were done. In other words, those preliminary blood tests that were done on several stains and so on and so forth that were in and around the apartment.
Yeah.
When I say in and around, right, in the different rooms that covered different possible blood stains. And so there's a couple things that stuck out to me. First of all, those presumptive tests are not 100%. They can be positives that are false, and there can be negatives that are false. But that's the reason that you use them, is to get some information regarding whether you possibly have a positive. And if you do have a positive, of course, you collect and get to a lab that has the resources and the facilities to make absolute determination. So if you look at those Tylers, we've got two positives, essentially. And then on one of the positives, there's several stains, but they just blood in some of the tests they did. But for me, and every agent and every officer is different, I'm sending it all to the lab, because I don't want to have a presumptive test not be correct, and there would be blood there. That's just how I work.
That's what I didn't understand. How come some of this stuff wasn't sent to the lab? In fact, I sent you a text last night. It's like, I don't understand how come they've refused to send some of these items to the lab, because the only interpretation that I had that may have been different about them not sending it to the lab would have been they were sending it to Idaho, and then Idaho would have sent it to the lab. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but what I'm finding doesn't correlate, if you will. If you look at the item seized, which was on the search warrant return, and what you really have to look at is both of these documents to make heads or tails about what was done. And you have to return to the judge by law. They have to list out what was recovered. And that needs to match then what was tested and what these new documents show. So the reason you don't see on the document return, the search warrant return, any of these others, like the bottom side of the rug and the shower curtain, things like that, is because I don't think they took it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting too, that I think your perspective on this is so important. This is what you did. You were SWAT team. You went in. You were able to collect evidence. And so when something's sticking out to you in this situation, I'm like, well, that I want to pay attention to what you're saying. I want to pay attention to what are those things sticking out to you. And I just is doing the best I can to glean from you on that. So when you're saying, hey, this is peculiar, that's peculiar, I think all of us should listen and open our ears up a little bit.
Well, Tyler, and I'll tell you what, there's so much information we still don't have about all of these items and things. So when you go into one of these residents like they did, and you conduct these sort of investigations, there is so much more paperwork we're not seeing just regarding this search warrant being served. You can see letters on there, A, B, C, and so forth. Each room is going to be marked with a letter. And there's going to be search agents that are responsible for searching that room. And there's going to be either 302s, report of investigations, or supplemental reports that show every item, exactly where it was from, more detailed information. A lot of people confuse that search warrant return should have had that information on it, but they never do. It's just simply to tell the judge what you took. And then this document we're looking at is also not in totality of everything that was done, or it doesn't give us a full insight about the item. So it's kind of, you have to see that whole entire picture. And yes, I've done more searches than I could name, Tyler, hundreds that are just like this. So it's a long process, and everybody, the agents are all diligent. But as I said, everybody has their own protocols and their own decision making. The case agent or whoever was in charge of this crime scene as to what they were going to turn over to the lab for testing.
When we talk about the body cam footage, and it's interesting, these things are being released on the same day, as has been the case in Bryan Kohberger every single time. When one thing's released, it's like five things that are totally separate seem to also be released at the same time. I don't know why that's happening so much in this case. I think of it a little bit as distraction. I don't think it's coordinated distraction, but sometimes we get distracted by what we should really focus on. There was that body cam footage that was released, and I'd love to get your insight on it. My initial reaction when I was watching it yesterday was like, well, was he acting peculiar or not? He certainly had better social skills than I was imagining based on what was said. But then I watched some of your feedback on Cuomo, was reading some other comments today. I'm like, I might have missed the boat on the way I was perceiving what took place. So I'm all ears. I'm open to learning what you thought was happening.
Well, I think it's easy to look at everything through the eyes of somebody who is, your average citizen, like your average good person, your average Joe that's driving. And like so many of us will enter that intersection, especially when we're in a hurry, right? Other than that, we know to stay in our lane and not get in the middle of the intersection, because what if that light turns, and what if somebody runs the light from the oncoming traffic, which happens so often? I was just driving recently. I guess it's been a few weeks ago now, but somebody did exactly that. They were in the left-hand turn lane, and they wanted to go for it. As the light changed, but somebody oncoming was going for it, going straight ahead, and T-boned them, and they flew straight into this telephone pole, into a McDonald's, and I was racing off to something, but because I'm a EMT, I pulled over and gave assistance to the woman who had gotten T-boned. But that's the whole reason for the law. When you're in the middle of that intersection, it's not a good place to be. And I've seen a lot of banter going back and forth regarding whether it's even a law in Washington. And I saw somebody posted something from 1972 saying that you were allowed to. But then I found out the driver's test from 2012, and it says clearly you're not. Are you allowed to go into the intersection as light turns? And the answer is no on the driver's test. So the point is, I can't imagine that it's legal to do that really anywhere for the reasons I've just named. It's dangerous. We all do it and have done it, but it doesn't make it safe. But back to your question, is he saying anything out of line? What I see is somebody that just keeps at it. I thought it was very clear she wasn't planning on ticketing him. She was just planning on telling him, listen, I was right behind you, pulled you over for running a red light, because she wants to get that on the books. It's a small town. If he does it again, yes, he's going to get ticketed if she sees it. But he just makes up all, in my opinion, a lot of excuses. He says, well, I thought the car was going to yield to me, like the oncoming traffic car. Did you see that?
I heard him say that.
So, he says to the police officer, did you see that? And she says, no. So I took from that it was a bunch of malarkey. He was just trying to sort of make up a set of facts and get her to go along with it. She didn't buy that. And then he talks about, well, in Pennsylvania, we don't have to do this. Well, or that we can pull into the intersection. Well, she doesn't really buy that. They're in Washington. And then at the very end, I thought he does a really passive-aggressive, statement when he says, well, so the best thing, or what you would have wanted me to do is back up that, just very sarcastic. And I don't know. From my experience, I think that people typically act in situations of small crime as they act in large crimes. And if the whole thing is about making excuses for your behavior instead of just saying, you know what, you're right, I shouldn't have been in the middle of the intersection. It was a red light. Apologies, officer. I won't do it again.
Yeah.
That's your normal reaction from your normal Joe.
Yeah.
And so these are three things that I just, taught me that I from somebody who really did commit this murder to act like.
He also mentioned a rural area, like being from rural Pennsylvania, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and sort of diplomatic or coercive statement have her be his side. So he's trying to make the point at that time, listen, poor me. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm really not from here. And I was in a rural area, so I really don't know how to drive in the big city, which is Pullman, or, that's really not a large city. So I agree with you. I think that was just, again, a manipulation where people just start throwing out small details to try to convince people that they're really in the right when they're not.
One theory about Bryan Kohberger was that he had Asperger's or maybe some form of autism. Did you see any clue pieces or anything to indicate that in this interaction?
No, and I've never seen really any information about that, anything supportive. I was lucky enough to get to work with an author on a piece that strictly focused on Bryan Kohberger and his background and his work and all of that. And we never found anything that would intimate that at all. And I would further say that one of the networks is getting ready to do really an in-depth analysis and go to every single place that he's been associated work-wise, school-wise, socially, and that should be interesting for people who really are just wanting to understand, somebody like Bryan Kohberger, again, if he did indeed commit these crimes, I suspect.
That's super fascinating. Well, I appreciate your time today. Is there any other thoughts you had about anything maybe we didn't talk about? You're like, oh, we need to have this as a part of the discussion as well.
Well, I just wanted, and maybe you touched on this already, Tyler. Did you touch on the gag order and the motion and
no, haven't.
Where kind of everything is on that? So essentially, and I recently reposted it just so everybody could see who's affected and what's affected in terms of information. Because, as time goes on, all of this happened in December and January. So it's been months now, and our memories fade, and a lot of the paperwork is long and intricate. But anyway, I posted that because, of course, now the media, as well as Goncalves family, they are again asking for this order to be lifted and or altered in some way, to be less restrictive. And that all happened because basically, Mother May I, you need to ask the district court before you go up to the Supreme Court. And they didn't. And I understand why they didn't, because they're essentially asking the person that the magistrate judge who laid down the law.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have said district judge. I should have said magistrate judge. So the magistrate judge was the one that gave the orders. Very odd for her to. And I don't think she will. I think that she won't. And then now it can go through the system correctly. But I think the Supreme Court just wants it to come through in the correct order that it should have been filed.
Well, I mean, that makes sense, right? From all perspectives. And you even said, I heard you mention this on the show the other night, that your biggest thing is making sure there's justice for these families. And so from that perspective, you're in favor of the gag order, the non-dissemination order.
I am. I know people believe this is an order that very much favors the defense. I think it favors both parties. I just think it favors justice because not only the jury pool issue, which I think is a lesser issue than the bigger issue, and that is getting all this information out, having witnesses and everybody involved in this case being interviewed and providing information that may not even be accurate to the press. Right now, the press is constantly fielding questions to their sources and providing information based on what they know, but it's nothing, it's source information. It's not specifically from law enforcement. And I think we need to have this case because of the ramifications for these four individuals and their families be protected and be out of the media. That's just me, Tyler. I do feel very strongly about that.
Well, I'm in favor of whatever gets justice. I've said that multiple times. Like, personally, selfishly, yeah, I want to know what the heck's going on, but I'm also okay with being in a situation where the families are most protected. I think that that's also equally as important. So I'm with you on that for sure.
Yeah, I think most everybody who really cares about this case, that's what we all care about. It's interesting now, being involved with the media as a contributor. I know my partners mostly want the gag order to go away. They want to be able to report news from law enforcement and from families and from attorneys. So it's interesting to hear their perspective, and I certainly respect it. But being on the other side, really, in the adjudication process, I think the judge is right on with her ruling and her orders, and I hope they stay in place.
Yeah, I think they probably will. It'll be interesting to see what happens at trial, but not long after that, the preliminary hearing's coming up, and we'll probably learn a lot more information during that preliminary hearing even.
We're going to learn so much more, Tyler. I've kind of stressed it over and over that unfortunately preliminary hearings often become mini trials, and our criminal justice system is not set up for two trials. Yeah. We have two different purposes. One is preliminary hearing is strictly probable cause, and the other one is guilt or innocence. And to, make those interchangeable in terms of making a secondary trial at the preliminary hearing is just so wrong. And I just hope this judge limits everything, that once the probable cause has been put forth by the prosecution and the defense has had a time to cross that it ends right there.
Yeah.
We'll see.
No, I think that's great. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for you do it every time. You figure out a way to make some time for us. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You bet. And Tyler, all the best to your followers. I really do enjoy reading your comments. I always listen to your streams, and I know you're trying to stay on top of this and get information out because it is such an important case. And so thank you for doing that, and thanks to your listeners for such good comments and questions.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like the role I'm playing in this community right now is trying to continue to put out the most fact-driven resource, and without interjecting too many of my own opinions along the way, because there's a lot of misinformation that ends up making its way onto the scene. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yes, you bet, Tyler. And thanks again. And I look forward to listening to this one.
Thanks, Jennifer. Have a great day.
You too.